There's a photograph that exists in 3 family albums across eastern Kentucky. Same image, same date printed on the back in faded ink, November 14th, 1952. It shows 23 children sitting at their desks in a one-room schoolhouse, their faces turned toward the camera with expressions that aren't quite smiles. The photographer's shadow stretches across the wooden floor like a stain. But here's what makes this photograph impossible. Every single child in that image was reported missing by the end of that winter. All 23 of them, gone within 11 weeks of that picture being taken. And yet no one talks about it. Not the county records, not the historical societies, not even the descendants of the families who lost them. Because in 1953, someone made a decision that it was better to let this story disappear into the fog that rolled through those mountains. Better to let it become a whisper passed between grandmothers who wouldn't explain why they crossed themselves when they drove past the old schoolhouse foundation. The building itself burned down in March of 1953, 4 months after the last child vanished. Electrical fire, they said. But there was no electricity running to that school. It had been abandoned for weeks by then, the door left swinging open in the wind, desks still in their rows as if the students had simply stepped out for recess and never returned. When the volunteer firefighters arrived that night, they said the smoke smelled wrong. Not like burning wood or kerosene. They said it smelled like wet cloth and chalk dust, and something underneath that made them gag through their masks. One of them, a man named Curtis Bentley, refused to ever speak about what he saw through the windows before the roof collapsed. He moved his family to Ohio 3 weeks later and told his children they were never to set foot in Kentucky again. He died in 1981. His daughter found a letter in his effects, sealed and addressed to, "Whoever finds this when I'm gone." Inside was a single sentence. They were still sitting at their desks. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore or rural legend passed down to frighten children away from wandering. This is about what happens when an entire community agrees to forget something so disturbing that speaking it aloud feels like a kind of violence. And it's about the 3 women who, 70 years later, decided they couldn't live with the silence anymore. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The schoolhouse was called Pinnacle Ridge Elementary, though it served children from 5 different hollows spread across 12 miles of mountain territory. Most of the students walked to school, some for over an hour each way, carrying their lunches in metal pails and their lessons in canvas sacks that their mothers had sewn. The teacher's name was Miss Vera Holcomb, 26 years old, from a teaching family in Prestonsburg. She'd taken the position in September of 1952 because the previous teacher, a woman named Eleanor Marsh, had left abruptly in the middle of the prior school year. No forwarding address, no goodbye to the students. Her belongings were found neatly packed in her boarding room, rent paid through the month, but Eleanor Marsh herself simply vanished. The school board hired Vera without asking too many questions. They needed someone willing to teach in the mountains, and Vera had a gentle way about her that made parents trust her with their children. What we know about the weeks leading up to November 14th comes from a diary that Vera kept, found decades later in a storage unit in Lexington that had gone unpaid and been auctioned off. The man who bought the contents didn't realize what he had until he read through the small leather journal with Vera's name embossed on the cover. He tried to return it to the County Historical Society. They refused to accept it. He tried the state archives. They said they had no record of Vera Holcomb ever teaching in Kentucky. So he posted excerpts online in 2019, and within 48 hours, the post was removed. Not by him. He woke up one morning and his entire account had been deleted, along with every cached version of the pages he'd shared. But 3 people had already copied the text, and those 3 people started comparing what they knew. Because it turned out they were all descended from families who'd lived in those hollows, and they all had the same photograph in their attics. Vera's diary entries from October 1952 are mundane at first, lesson plans, notes about which students were struggling with arithmetic, observations about the weather turning cold early. But on October 23rd, something changes in her writing. "The children have been asking about the fog," she wrote. "They say it's been coming closer to the schoolhouse each morning. I told them it's just the season changing, that fog is natural in the mountains. But today during afternoon lessons, I looked out the window and realized I couldn't see the tree line anymore. The fog had come up around us while we were inside, and when I looked at the children, they were all staring at the windows, not moving, just staring, and I realized they'd stopped breathing, all of them, for just a moment. Then Mary Tolliver gasped and started crying and the spell broke. I don't know what to call what I saw, but I know I saw it. The entries continue through early November, and Vera's handwriting becomes less controlled, more urgent. On November 3rd, she wrote that one of the older boys, Thomas Breckenridge, age 14, had stopped coming to school. His father came by the schoolhouse to tell Vera that Thomas was needed at home for farm work, but Vera noted something strange. The father wouldn't look at her when he spoke. He kept his eyes on the ground, and his hands were shaking. I asked if Thomas was all right. Vera wrote, and Mr. Breckenridge said something I can't stop thinking about. He said, "He's home. That's what matters. He's home where we can see him." Then he left before I could ask what he meant. That afternoon, I counted the desks. 23. We'd started the year with 24 students. I'd been so preoccupied I hadn't noticed Thomas's empty desk. But when I counted again, there were still 23 desks. As if Thomas had never existed at all. I checked my attendance records. His name is there through October 31st. After that, the pages are blank where his name should be, not crossed out. Just blank, like the ink disappeared. On November 8th, Vera made a decision. She walked to the home of the school board superintendent, a man named Harold Grigsby, and told him she needed to speak with him privately. What she told him isn't recorded in her diary, but his response is, "Miss Sam, Grigsby listened to everything I said." Vera wrote that night. About the fog, about the children's behavior, about Thomas, about the feeling I have every morning when I walk up the path to the school and see all of them already inside, sitting at their desks before I arrive, even though I'm always early. About how they turn and look at me in unison when I open the door, and how their eyes seem wrong somehow. Too dark, too knowing. Mr. Grigsby was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me if I'd heard about Miss Marsh, the teacher before me. I said I knew she'd left suddenly. He said she came to me with the same concerns. Said the children weren't right. Said something was watching from the fog. I told her she was overworked, that teaching in isolation can play tricks on the mind. 2 days later she was gone. We found her car at the schoolhouse. Door open, engine running. But no Eleanor. He looked at me and said, "I'm telling you this as a kindness, Miss Holcomb. Go home tonight. Pack your things and leave before morning. Don't go back to that school. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just go." I asked him why he didn't close the school if he knew something was wrong. He said, "Because it doesn't matter if there's a teacher there or not. The children still come. Every morning. They sit at those desks. And if we close the school, they'll just sit there in the dark. At least with a teacher, they look normal. I'm writing this from my room. I don't know what to do. Part of me says leave. Part of me says those children need someone who'll stay." November 14th, 1952. The date on the photograph. Vera's diary entry from that morning is 3 sentences long. "I'm going back. They're just children. Whatever's happening, they need someone who won't abandon them." The photograph itself was taken by a traveling photographer named William Keffart, who made his living documenting schools across rural Kentucky for a state education project. He arrived at Pinnacle Ridge Elementary unannounced, which was his practice. Walk in, take the photo, collect payment from the county later. Simple. According to the invoice he submitted, he arrived at Tunvey 47 in the morning. The fog was so thick he almost missed the turn off to the school. He said later, in the only interview he ever gave about that day, that when he walked up to the building, he couldn't hear anything. No children's voices, no sounds of lessons. Just silence inside the fog. But when he opened the door, there they were. 23 children sitting perfectly still at their desks, and Miss Holcomb standing at the front of the room with a piece of chalk in her hand, frozen mid-word on the blackboard. Keffart said he called out a greeting. Said good morning, introduced himself, explained he was there to take a photograph for the state records. No one moved. No one spoke. He said Miss Holcomb turned to look at him, and her face was completely blank. Not upset or confused, he said in the interview. Blank. Like she was somewhere else and this was just her body still standing there. He asked if now was a good time for the photograph. Miss Holcomb nodded. Didn't say a word, just nodded. So Keffart set up his camera, arranged the shot, and told the children to look natural. "That's when I noticed something," he said. They were already looking at the camera, all of them. Before I even got it set up, they were staring right at where I was going to be, and none of them blinked. Not once. Not during the setup, not during the exposure. I took the photo as fast as I could and got out of there. When I was back in my car, I looked at the school through the fog, and I swear I could see them through the windows, still sitting there, still staring in my direction even though I'd moved. I developed that photo the same day, and when I looked at it, really looked at it, I realized something was wrong with their eyes. They're all looking at the camera, yes, but they're not looking at the camera. They're looking through it. At something behind it. At something behind me. Keffart delivered the photograph to the county office and never took another school photo again. He sold his equipment and moved to Florida, where he worked at a hardware store until his death in 1998. The interview where he discussed this happened in 1996, conducted by a graduate student researching rural education in post-war Kentucky. The student's thesis was never published. She withdrew from her program 3 months after the interview and, according to her advisor, suffered what was described as a nervous breakdown. Her notes from the interview mention one detail Kefart shared off the record. He said that when he got home the night he took that photograph, he developed the image and noticed something in the background. Something in the fog outside the schoolhouse windows. He wouldn't describe what he saw, but he burned the negative, kept only one print, which he sealed in an envelope and never looked at again. That print is the one that ended up in 3 different family albums. The same print, exactly the same, down to a small crease in the upper right corner. The disappearances began the week after the photograph was taken. Sarah Collins, age 7, didn't come home from school on November 18th. Her mother walked the path to the schoolhouse and found it empty. Desks in rows, chalkboard still showing Miss Holcomb's handwriting from that day's lesson, Sarah's coat hanging on its peg, but no children, no teacher. The mother went to the sheriff. He organized a search party. 20 men combed those mountains for 3 days. They found nothing, no tracks, no signs of struggle. On the 4th day, Sarah's father went back to the schoolhouse alone. He told the sheriff later that when he walked inside, Sarah was sitting at her desk, just sitting there in the dark, her hands folded in front of her, staring straight ahead. He called her name. She didn't respond. He walked over to her, put his hand on her shoulder. She was cold, not dead cold, just cold, like she'd been sitting in winter air. He said her name again. This time she turned and looked at him, and he said her eyes were completely black, not the pupils, the entire eye. She smiled at him and said, "We're learning, Papa. We have to stay and learn." Then she turned back to face the front of the empty classroom. Her father tried to pick her up to carry her out, but she wouldn't move. It was like she was fastened to the desk. He pulled harder. She started screaming, not a child's scream. He said it sounded like wind through a canyon, like something that had never been human trying to imitate the sound of fear. He let go and ran. When the sheriff and others went back an hour later, Sarah was gone again. The desk was warm to the touch. Over the next 8 weeks, 22 more children vanished in similar ways, each one last seen at school. Each one found once, briefly by a parent, sitting at their desk in the empty building, before disappearing again for good. Some parents refused to go looking. They held their remaining children close and prayed the fog wouldn't come for them too. Others went every day, standing outside the schoolhouse, calling names into the silence. On January 29, 1953, a mother named Ruth Combs broke down the schoolhouse door at midnight. She'd been having dreams. She said that her son James was calling for her. When she got inside, all 23 children were sitting at their desks in perfect darkness. No lamps, no candles. Just sitting there. And at the front of the room, Miss Holcomb stood at the chalkboard, writing the same sentence over and over and over. Ruth could see it in the moonlight coming through the windows. They want to stay. They want to stay. Hundreds of times, covering every inch of the board, the words getting smaller and more frantic as they reached the edges. Ruth screamed for her son. James turned his head. His eyes were black like the others. He said, "Mama, go home. You can't learn here. You're already grown." Ruth grabbed him. This time he came with her. She got him outside into her car and drove through the fog as fast as she could. When she got home, she carried James inside, put him in his bed, and locked every door and window in the house. In the morning, his bed was empty. The lock on his bedroom door was still fastened from the outside. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have kept searching? Or would you have let the fog keep them? The fire happened on March 3, 1953. No one called it in. The volunteer fire department only found out because one of the men, driving home late from a neighboring county, saw the glow through the fog. By the time they arrived, the building was fully engulfed. The heat was so intense they couldn't get within 50 yards. Curtis Bentley, the firefighter who later fled to Ohio, was the one who got closest. He said he could see through the windows before the roof collapsed. He said the desks were still in their rows. And he said there were shapes sitting at those desks, perfectly still, even as the fire consumed everything around them. Small shapes, child-sized, not moving, not trying to escape, just sitting there as they burned. The other firefighters pulled Curtis back before he could get any closer. When the building finally collapsed, the sound it made wasn't right. Curtis said it sounded like a building falling and something else underneath it. Something like voices, hundreds of voices, all saying the same thing at the same moment, though he couldn't make out the words. The fire burned until dawn. When the sun came up and the fog finally lifted, there was nothing left but the foundation and 23 small piles of ash arranged in a pattern that matched where the desks had been. The county sent investigators. Their report, which was filed and then sealed until 2008, concluded that the fire was of suspicious origin but that no remains were found on the property. No human remains. The ash was tested and came back as wood, fabric, paper, and something the lab couldn't identify. Something organic but not matching any known animal or plant material. The report recommended the site be left undisturbed and that no structure ever be built there again. The recommendation was followed. The land was purchased by the county and has remained empty for 70 years. No for sale sign, no development. Just the foundation stones slowly disappearing into the undergrowth and a path that locals won't walk down, even in daylight. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. The thing that the three descendants discovered when they started comparing their family histories. Every single one of those 23 children is listed in their family's genealogical records as having lived full lives. Married, had children, died of old age decades later. There are graves with their names. There are obituaries. There are descendants walking around today who can trace their lineage back to children who were supposed to have vanished in 1952. Sarah Collins, James Combs, Thomas Breckenridge, Mary Tolliver. All of them. The records show they survived. They show they left those mountains, moved to different states, started families, lived normal lives. But if you ask their children, their grandchildren, about them, something strange happens. They remember them. They have photos. They have stories. But when you push for details, the memories get fuzzy. The photos show figures that are somehow hard to focus on, and every single descendant will eventually say the same thing, usually in a quiet voice, usually looking away. I never met them. My mother told me about them, but I never actually met them. And now that I think about it, I don't think she did either. Miss Vera Holcomb's body was found in a hotel room in Cincinnati on March 5, 1953, 2 days after the fire. She'd checked in under a false name. The coroner ruled it a suicide. She'd taken enough sleeping pills to kill her 3 times over. But her diary was in the room with her, open to the last entry, dated March 3rd, written in handwriting that was barely legible. I got out. I left them, but they followed me. I can hear them outside my door. All 23 of them, asking when class will start again, asking me to come back and teach them, asking me why I left when they needed me. I can hear Miss Marsh's voice too. She's with them. She's telling them I'm a better teacher than she was, that I stayed longer, that I loved them more. The fog is coming under the door. I can see it. I'm so tired. I just want to sleep, but I know if I sleep, I'll wake up at that desk, at the front of the room, and I'll be the one writing on the board forever. So I'm making sure I don't wake up. I'm making sure I stay here, in this room. In this body! I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'm not. The entry stops there. The pen had fallen from her hand and left a long ink line down the page. In 2019, 70 years after the fire, the 3 descendants who'd been privately researching their family histories decided to meet in person. Their names are being withheld at their request, but we'll call them Rachel, Margaret, and Claire. They'd been exchanging emails for months, comparing notes, sharing what little documentation they'd found. And they'd all arrived at the same conclusion. Something was still there, at that schoolhouse site. Something that wanted to be remembered, or maybe something that wanted to be forgotten. They decided to visit together. All 3 of them drove to Kentucky, met at a diner in Prestonsburg, and followed the old roads up into the mountains. The path to the school was overgrown but still visible. They parked and walked the last quarter-mile through woods that were too quiet. No birds, no insects, just their footsteps on leaves that should have made more sound than they did. When they reached the clearing, the foundation was still there, stones arranged in a rectangle, and in the center, where the floor had been, the ground was barren. Nothing grew there, not even weeds. Rachel was the one who brought the photograph, the one from her grandmother's album. She laid it on the ground in the center of the foundation. And that's when they heard it. A bell. A school bell ringing once, clear and bright and impossibly loud in the silence. They looked at each other. Margaret asked if they should leave, but Claire was staring at something. She pointed to the tree line. The fog was coming. In broad daylight, on a clear afternoon in July, fog was rolling through the trees toward them. Not natural fog. This moved with purpose, flowing around obstacles, gathering itself as it approached. They ran. All 3 of them. They didn't look back until they reached the car. When they did, they saw figures standing at the edge of the woods. Small figures. Children. 23 of them. Just standing there, watching, not moving, and in front of them a taller figure, a woman in a long dress. As they drove away, Rachel looked in the side mirror. The figures were still standing there, but now they were closer. Not running, not walking, just closer. As if distance didn't matter to them the way it mattered to the living, none of the three women have been back. They've stopped researching. They've stopped talking about it publicly. But 6 months after their visit, each of them received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a photograph, not the original from 1952, a new one, taken from the same angle as the original, same desks, same children in the same positions. But the children were looking directly at the camera now, not through it. At it in the back of the classroom, sitting at a desk that hadn't been there in the original photo, was a figure that looked like Rachel, and another that looked like Margaret, and another that looked like Claire. The three women compared their photos. They were identical, and in the bottom right corner, written in neat cursive handwriting, was a single sentence: "Class is still in session." The local post office has no record of the envelopes being mailed. The county clerk's office denies that the land at Pinnacle Ridge was ever used for a school. The state education board has no documentation of a Pinnacle Ridge Elementary in their archives, but the photograph exists, 3 copies, in 3 different homes, and sometimes, late at night, the women say they can hear it, faint but unmistakable, a school bell ringing, and children's voices reciting lessons they'll never finish, asking questions they'll never stop asking, waiting for a teacher who'll never come, sitting at desks that burned 70 years ago but somehow still remain, in a classroom that exists in the fog, where time moves differently, where children who vanished still learn, where the past isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to walk through that door and take attendance one more time. The question isn't whether you believe this story. The question is whether you'd go looking for that photograph in your own family's attic. And if you found it, would you check the faces in the back row? Because if you see yourself there, sitting at a desk you don't remember, wearing clothes you've never owned, staring at something just behind the camera, then you're already part of the lesson. And the fog knows where you live.